Hello and welcome. Today, we're going to demystify two big economic terms you hear all the time, especially around budget season: fiscal deficit and budgetary deficit. You hear them on the news, you see them in the papers, so let's finally get into the real story behind them.
Think about it in a really simple way. Just like a family has a budget, so does the government. And what happens when a family's expenses are more than its income for the month? Well, you fall short, right? You have a gap. In the case of a government, we just call that gap a deficit.
In this explainer, we're going to tackle 5 key things. First, what exactly is a deficit? Then we'll get into the main event, fiscal versus budgetary deficit. After that, we'll break it all down with some simple numbers. We'll also ask the question, can a deficit ever be a good thing? And finally, and maybe most importantly, why any of this actually matters to you.
So first things first, the absolute basic meaning of a deficit. Anytime your expenses are more than your income, that's a deficit. It's a concept that applies everywhere, to an individual, to a company, and of course, to a country's government. All right, now let's get to our main topic. To measure a government's shortfall, there are 2 key terms: budgetary deficit and fiscal deficit. Now, they might sound pretty similar, but trust me, there is a world of difference between them. Let's see how. The budgetary deficit is an old-school concept. In India, it's pretty much been out of use since 1997. The way it was calculated was by taking the government's total spending and subtracting its total revenue. But here's the twist. That revenue figure also included all borrowings. This meant the actual financial health of the country wasn't clear at all.
And that's exactly why we now use the fiscal deficit. It's the modern standard. The fiscal deficit is the gap between the government's total spending and its total revenue. But, and this is the key, it does not include borrowings in the revenue. This number tells us very clearly exactly how much new debt the government needs to take on to meet its expenses.
Now, what's really interesting here is when you see the formulas side by side. The only difference is that one little detail: borrowings. The budgetary deficit counts borrowed money as income, while the fiscal deficit keeps it separate. And that single change makes the fiscal deficit a much more honest and clear indicator of financial health.
To understand these concepts even better, let's walk through a simple example. Let's just assume all the figures are in hypothetical units.
Okay, imagine the government's total expenditure is 100 units, and its total income, from taxes and other sources, without taking any loans, is 75 units. So, 100 minus 75 is 25. That 25 units is the government's fiscal deficit. It means the government has to borrow 25 new units just to cover its spending.
But this brings up a really important question. Okay, we know 25 units are being borrowed, but where is that money actually going? Is it being used to build up the country, or is it just covering daily expenses?
The answer to that comes from another term called the revenue deficit. Let's say the government's daily running costs, like salaries and subsidies. We call this revenue expenditure, are 85 units. And its daily income from things like taxes is 70 units. That means there's a 15-unit shortfall just to cover day-to-day operations. So out of our total borrowing of 25, a full 15 units were spent just to keep the lights on.
And this leads us to a fascinating conclusion. Not every deficit is the same. Just looking at the deficit number isn't enough. It's crucial to see where the borrowed money is actually being used.
A good deficit happens when borrowed money is spent on capital expenditure. Think of things like building new highways, ports, or power plants. These things create long-term assets for the country and boost future growth. On the other hand, a bad deficit is when that money goes towards revenue expenditure, like paying for subsidies or interest on old loans. This is unproductive spending because it doesn't create any new assets.
Now, you might be thinking, what does the government's deficit have to do with me? But the truth is, the fiscal deficit has a direct impact on all of our lives.
If the fiscal deficit is very high, it can cause several problems. First, a debt trap, where the government has to take on new debt just to pay the interest on its old debt. Second, inflation, because when the government spends more, prices for everyday things can go up. Third, crowding out, where the government borrows so much money that there's less left in the market for private businesses and regular people. And fourth, this can lead to higher interest rates, which makes your home loan, car loan, everything more expensive.
So, in the end, I'll leave you with this question. Is a country's deficit an investment in the future, or is it a burden for the next generation? The answer really depends on where that money is being spent. Definitely something to think about. I'll see you next time with a new topic. Thanks for joining.